The late afternoon sun cast long, weary shadows across the asphalt of the old highway. A ribbon of gray stretched thin through rolling green hills. It was on this quiet stretch of road that Leo's world, a small and carefully managed universe, was about to be gently shaken. His garage, Leo's auto and heart, was more than just a business. It was a legacy, a sanctuary built of grease, sweat, and the faint, ever-present scent of gasoline. It was the place where he could mend the broken things of the world, a skill he wished he could apply to the more complex fractures of the human heart. Inside, his daughter Mia, a bright spark of 10 with eyes that held all her father's kindness, was meticulously organizing a tray of wrenches, humming a tune that was slightly off-key but full of joy. She was the engine of his life, the reason the garage doors opened each morning, and the reason his own heart, though bruised, kept on beating with a steady, reliable rhythm. A sputtering cough, a mechanical gasp for life, broke the pastoral silence of the afternoon, drawing Leo's attention from the stubborn bolt he was wrestling. He wiped a grimy hand across his brow, his gaze finding the source of the sound, a sleek, dark motorcycle, now coasting to a defeated stop just past his driveway. A rider, clad in worn leather that seemed at odds with the bike's expensive frame, dismounted with a frustrated sigh. Leo watched for a moment, a familiar sense of empathy washing over him. He knew the feeling of being stranded, of plans going awry, of being at the mercy of machinery and fate. He set his wrench down, the clatter echoing in the cavernous space of the garage, and called out to Mia, telling her to stay put while he went to see if he could help a traveler in distress. It was a scene he had played out 100 times before, a simple act of roadside assistance for a stranger. The rider pulled off a helmet, revealing a cascade of dark hair and a face that seemed both tired and strikingly beautiful, even under a thin layer of road dust. Her name, she said, was Isabella, and her voice was a melody of frustration and faint hope. She explained the bike had just given up, losing power without any warning, leaving her stranded miles from the nearest town. Leo listened patiently, his experienced eyes already scanning the motorcycle, noting the high-end components, the custom paintwork. A machine that whispered of wealth, even if its owner's bestie attire screamed otherwise. He saw the subtle tension in her jaw, the way she held herself with a guarded sort of grace, and he felt a protective instinct stir within him, the same one he felt for Mia. He offered a simple, reassuring smile, a promise that in his small corner of the world, things that were broken could almost always be fixed again. He wheeled the heavy bike into the garage, the scent of its hot engine mingling with the familiar aromas of his workshop. Isabella followed, her gaze sweeping over the organized chaos of tools, spare parts, and half-finished projects. She seemed out of place, a rare bird in a mechanic's nest, yet she watched with an intensity that surprised Leo. She asked questions, not just about the engine's potential ailments, but about him, about the garage, about the photographs of Mia that were taped to the old metal toolbox. Her curiosity felt genuine, a refreshing change from the usual transactional nature of his work. He found himself opening up, telling her about taking over the garage from his father, about raising Mia on his own, about the simple joys and quiet struggles that defined his days. The work was his life, and his daughter was his entire world. As Leo began his diagnosis, deftly moving from the spark plugs to the fuel line, a small, confident voice piped up from beside the toolbox. "Are you a princess?" Mia asked, her wide, innocent eyes fixed on Isabella. A soft, unexpected laugh escaped Isabella's lips, a sound that seemed to chase some of the shadows from the corners of the garage. She knelt down to Mia's level, her guarded expression melting away to reveal a warmth that captivated Leo. "No, sweetie, I'm not a princess," she said gently. "I'm just a traveler whose iron horse decided to take a nap." Mia giggled, instantly charmed, and soon she was chattering away, showing Isabella her collection of interesting rocks and a drawing she'd made of a flying car. Leo watched him, a wrench forgotten in his hand, a strange and unfamiliar warmth blooming in his chest. The problem with the bike, Leo discovered, was a faulty fuel injector, a small part, but a critical one that he didn't have in stock. It would have to be ordered, which meant it would be at least a day, maybe two, before Isabella could be on her way. He delivered the news with an apologetic frown, expecting a wave of impatience or annoyance. Instead, Isabella simply nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Is there a motel nearby?" she asked, her gaze drifting not towards the road, but towards the small and tidy house that stood behind the garage. The question hung in the air, filled with unspoken possibilities. The local motel was a dingy, uninviting place, and the thought of her staying there felt wrong to him, a discordant note in the quiet symphony of his life that she had so unexpectedly joined. Before Leo could even formulate a response, Mia, with the unhesitating boldness of a child, tugged on Isabella's sleeve. "You can stay with us," she declared, her face beaming with excitement. "We have a spare room, and Daddy makes the best pancakes in the whole wide world. Right, Daddy?" Leo's heart did a little flip-flop. It was impulsive. It was improper. It broke all the unspoken rules of keeping his life and his work separate. But looking at the hopeful expression on his daughter's face, and then at the surprising vulnerability in Isabella's eyes, he found himself unable to say no. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. He was a man who fixed engines, who understood the logical mechanics of how things worked. But this felt different, an unknown mechanism he had no manual for. And so, with a handed nod, Leo agreed. He told himself in Mia that he couldn't bear to disappoint her. He told himself it was the decent thing to do, to not leave a stranger, stranded and alone in a less than savory motel. But deep down, a part of him he hadn't acknowledged in years knew the truth. He was doing it for himself. He was drawn to this mysterious woman, to the sadness that flickered behind her beautiful eyes, and the genuine warmth she showed his daughter. For the first time in a very long time, the quiet, predictable rhythm of his life felt too slow, and the prospect of a little disruption, a little bit of the unknown, felt less like a complication and more like the beginning of a much-needed repair to his own stalled heart. Isabella accepted the offer with a gratitude that felt profound, her smile reaching her eyes for the first time since she had arrived. As she followed Leo and Nia towards the small house, leaving her silent, expensive motorcycle in the care of the gentle mechanic, she felt a sense of peace settle over her that no five-star hotel or luxury suite had ever provided. She was a woman who could have anything in the world she wanted, a woman who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a single word. Yet here, in this humble garage, covered in dust and offered a simple room by a kind-hearted stranger and his delightful daughter, she felt a glimmer of something she had been searching for her entire life. A place that felt, surprisingly, like coming home. The search for love had taken her down many gilded roads, but perhaps it was here, on this broken-down path, that she would finally find it. The guest room was simple, adorned with a handmade quilt and a small vase of wildflowers Mia had picked from the field behind the house. For Isabella, who was accustomed to minimalist penthouses and opulent hotel suites, designed by world-renowned artists, the room felt more real and comforting than any of them. The scent of lavender and sunshine hung in the air, a stark contrast to the sterile, perfumed environment she usually inhabited. She ran a hand over the soft, worn fabric of the quilt, a mosaic of colors and patterns sewn together with care. It was a testament to a life built on patience and love, not acquisition and profit. She felt the tight knot of tension in her shoulders, a constant companion in her life, begin to slowly, almost imperceptibly unwind. She was disconnected, anonymous, just Bella, the stranded traveler, and the freedom in that was intoxicating. Back in the garage the next morning, a different kind of connection was being forged. Isabella, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans borrowed from a box of Leo's late wife's things, insisted on watching him work. He was hesitant at first, his workshop his private domain, but her genuine interest was disarming. She didn't just watch, she learned, handing him tools, cleaning parts, her slender fingers surprisingly adept despite their manicured perfection. He explained the intricate dance of an internal combustion engine, the way fuel and air and fire combined to create motion. He spoke with a quiet passion, his hands moving with a familiar, confident grace. She saw in his work a reflection of his character, meticulous, honest, and dedicated to making things whole again. There was an artistry in the way he handled the greasy components, a reverence for the machine. Sparks flew, both literally from the welder he used on another project and figuratively in the space between them. Their hands would brush as she passed him a socket wrench, sending a jolt of awareness through them both. Their eyes would meet over the engine block, and for a long moment, the world would shrink to just the two of them, the clatter and clang of the garage fading into a distant hum. Leo found himself talking more than he had in years, sharing stories of his youth, his dreams of being a pilot, the bittersweet memories of his wife, and the all-consuming love he had for Mia. He was laying the blueprint of his life bare for this stranger, and it felt surprisingly natural, as if his soul had been waiting for a listener who truly wanted to hear its story. Mia, meanwhile, was a relentless and adorable matchmaker, a tiny cupid with pigtails and a mischievous grin. She would insist they all take breaks together, bringing them lemonade and cookies she had helped make. She would pull Isabella away to show her a secret fort she had built in the woods, then pull Leo along, making sure their hands were the ones she held. During one of these breaks, sitting on a log dappled with sunlight, Mia made a crown of daisies and placed it on Isabella's head. "Now you're the queen of the garage," she announced with grave solemnity. Isabella caught Leo's eye, and they shared a laugh, a warm, genuine sound that echoed through the trees. In that moment, surrounded by the simple beauty of nature and the unconditional love of a child, Isabella felt a crack appear in the fortress she had built around her cart. Later that afternoon, as Leo was carefully fitting the new fuel injector, his hand slipped and a heavy wrench clattered onto his foot. He let out a sharp cry of pain, hopping on one leg and cursing under his breath. Instantly, Isabella was by his side, her brow furrowed with concern. She gently guided him to a stool, her touch firm but gentle as he knelt to inspect his rapidly swelling foot. There was no hesitation, no revulsion at the grease and grime, only a focused, tender care that stunned him into silence. She was decisive and competent, wrapping his ankle with a clean rag and a roll of electrical tape from his own bench, creating a makeshift but effective compress. He looked down at this incredible woman, who had every reason to be distant and aloof, tending to his minor injury as if it were the most important thing in the world. As she worked, a stray lock of her dark hair fell across her face. Without thinking, Leo reached out and gently tugged it behind her ear. The gesture was intimate, a silent acknowledgement of the new, fragile connection growing between them. She froze for a second, her gaze lifting to meet his. The air crackled with an unspoken energy, a potent mixture of gratitude, surprise, and a deep magnetic pull. The world outside the garage, with its deadlines and demands, ceased to exist. There was only the low hum of the fluorescent lights, the scent of oil, and the profound feeling of being seen, truly seen for the first time. The pain in his foot was forgotten, replaced by a different kind of ache, a longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel for so long. That evening, after Mia was asleep, they sat on the porch swing, a comfortable silence settling between them. The night was alive with the sound of crickets and the distant call of a lone owl. Isabella spoke softly about her travels, painting pictures with her words of bustling foreign markets and serene, lonely landscapes. She spoke of a life spent searching, though she kept the object of her search deliberately vague. Leo, in turn, spoke of the comforting predictability of the seasons in his small town, the joy of watching his daughter grow, the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work. They were from different universes, their lives governed by different laws of physics, yet on that porch swing, their orbits had somehow, miraculously, aligned. Leo felt a powerful urge to close the small distance between them, to see if the spark that had been igniting all day could finally catch fire. But fear held him back. The fear of what might happen when her motorcycle was fixed and she rode away, leaving his world quieter and dimmer than before. He was a mechanic. He understood that some parts were not interchangeable, that forcing a fit could break the entire machine. Was he just a temporary repair shop for her journey? A brief stopover on her way to somewhere else? The question haunted him, casting a slight chill over the warm night air and the even warmer presence of the woman sitting beside him. A woman who felt more familiar than a stranger had any right to be. Isabella too felt the pull, the silent invitation in his gaze. She wanted to tell him everything, to dismantle the intricate facade of Bella the Traveler and reveal the complex, lonely billionaire underneath. But she was terrified. Her wealth had always been a barrier, a distorting lens through which people saw her. This, what she was feeling with Leo, was pure and untainted. It was built on glee and kindness, on shared laughter and simple conversation. If she told him the truth, would it all shatter? Would he look at her differently, with resentment or awe, but not with the simple, honest affection she was beginning to cherish more than any asset in her portfolio? She chose to stay silent, to savor the moment, even as she knew that the road ahead was forking, and a choice would soon have to be made. The invitation was extended with the same innocent candor as the offer to stay. "You have to have dinner with us," Mia had insisted, her small hand firmly gripping Isabella's. "Daddy is making his special spaghetti. It's magic." Leo, caught off guard, could only blush, then confirm the offer, his heart doing that now familiar little lurch. The idea of sharing a meal, of breaking bread with Isabella in the heart of his home, felt monumental. The kitchen, usually just a functional space from preparing meals for him and Mia, suddenly felt like a stage, the setting for a scene of profound significance. He chopped onions and garlic with extra care, the familiar ritual grounding him as a whirlwind of emotions spun inside him. He was just a simple mechanic, and she was a mystery, but one he was increasingly desperate to solve. Isabella found herself eagerly anticipating the evening. The prospect of a home-cooked meal, of simple family dinner conversation, was more appealing than any Michelin-starred restaurant she had ever frequented. She watched as Leo moved around his kitchen with an easy, unpretentious confidence. The same confidence he showed in his garage. He was a creator, a man who made things with his hands, whether it was fixing an engine or crafting a meal for the people he cared about. She saw the love in the way he stirred the sauce, the care in how he set the table, even letting Mia place the napkins in slightly crooked arrangements. This was a world away from her own, a world where value was measured not in dollars, but in shared moments and simple acts of devotion. The meal itself was everything Mia had promised: chaotic, joyful, and utterly delicious. Spaghetti sauce ended up on cheeks and noses, and laughter echoed off the cozy kitchen walls. They talked about everything and nothing. Mia recounted her day at school with dramatic flair. Isabella shared a funny story about getting lost in Tokyo, and Leo told a tale about his first clunker of a car. There were no pretenses, no hidden agendas. For a few precious hours, they were not a mechanic, a billionaire, and a child. They were simply Leo, Bella, and Mia, a small, unlikely constellation that felt surprisingly bright. Isabella felt the last of her corporate armor melt away in the warmth of the small kitchen, leaving her feeling exposed, but wonderfully, terrifyingly alive. After Mia, full of spaghetti and happiness, had finally been tucked into bed, a quieter, more intimate atmosphere settled over the house. Leo and Isabella sat at the kitchen table, nursing mugs of tea, the remnants of their happy meal still around them. The silence was no longer just comfortable. It was charged, filled with all the things that had been left unsaid over the last 2 days. Leo looked at her across the table, at the way the soft kitchen light caught the gentle curve of her smile, and he knew he was in trouble. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart since his wife's passing were crumbling, brick by brick, and he wasn't sure he wanted to stop them from falling. This feeling was a ghost limb, an ache for a connection he thought he'd never feel again. "Tell me about her," Isabella said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Her gaze slickered to a framed photo on the wall, a picture of Leo with a smiling, vibrant woman. He knew instantly who she meant. He took a deep breath, the air suddenly feeling heavy in his lungs. He hadn't spoken about Sarah, his late wife, to anyone but Mia in years, but looking into Isabella's compassionate eyes, he found the words beginning to flow. He spoke of their high school romance, of their shared dreams, of the sudden, cruel illness that had taken her from him and Mia. He spoke of the grief that had been a suffocating fog, and how being a father to Mia had been the lighthouse that guided him back to shore. It was a painful, deeply personal story, a map of the biggest wound in his heart. Isabella listened without interruption, her entire being focused on him. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. Instead, she offered him the rare gift of her complete, undivided attention. When he finished, his voice thick with emotion, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was a simple anchor in his sea of memories, a silent message of understanding that meant more than any words could. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered, her own eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You loved her very much, and you are a wonderful father, Leo. She would be so proud of the man you are and the daughter you're raising." Her validation was a balm on a wound he didn't even realize was still so raw. In that moment of shared vulnerability, something shifted irrevocably between them. It was no longer just a spark of attraction or a fleeting connection. It was something deeper, something more terrifying and more beautiful. He was looking at a woman who saw him, not just the grease-stained mechanic or the lonely single dad, but the man underneath it all, with his history and his hurts. And he saw her, not just as the beautiful, mysterious traveler, but as a person with a profound capacity for empathy and kindness, a person who could listen to the saddest chapter of his life and not flinch away, but move closer. The kitchen, with its lingering scent of garlic and tomatoes, became a sacred space, a confessional where two lonely hearts had dared to show their scars. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers, a silent question in his eyes. She answered by squeezing his hand gently, a soft smile gracing her lips. The air was thick with the promise of a kiss that would seal this newfound intimacy, that would be a step across a threshold from which there would be no return. He leaned in slowly, getting her every chance to pull away, to stop this fragile, beautiful thing before it became too real. She didn't move. She met him halfway, her eyes fluttering closed as their lips were about to meet. The world seemed to hold its breath, the ticking of the old clock on the wall counting down the seconds to a moment that could change everything for both of them. But her heart, her complicated, secret-filled heart, hammered against her ribs. This was real. This feeling for this good, kind man was terrifyingly real, and it was all built on a foundation of omission, a lie of circumstance. If she kissed him now before he knew who she really was, would the kiss itself be a lie? The thought sent a jolt of panic through her. Just as their lips were about to touch, she pulled back, a flicker of fear and regret in her eyes. She started, but the words caught in her throat. The moment was broken. The space between them was suddenly a chasm again, filled with her unspoken secret, leaving Leo confused, hurt, and more uncertain than ever before about the woman who had so effortlessly captured his complicated heart. The next morning, the air in the house was thick with a palpable tension. The easy camaraderie of the previous days had been replaced by a careful, awkward dance. Leo was quiet, the memory of Isabella's sudden retreat stinging him with a confusion he couldn't shake. He tried to focus on the final adjustments to her motorcycle, pouring his frustration and hurt into the turn of a wrench. He told himself it was for the best, that he had been foolish to let his guard down so quickly. He was a mechanic, a single father. His life was here, in this garage, covered in the dust of routine. She was a bird of passage, and he had been naive to think she might consider building a nest for a little while. Her world was clearly somewhere else, a place he couldn't even begin to imagine. Isabella, for her part, was a storm of conflicting emotions. Guilt gnawed at her. She had seen the hurt in Leo's eyes, and it felt like a physical blow. Every instinct screamed at her to tell him the truth, to lay her billion-dollar secret at his feet and hope he could see past it, to the woman who was falling for him. But fear was a powerful paralytic. What if the truth acted like a poison, tainting the pure, simple thing that had grown between them? She watched him from the doorway of the garage, his shoulders slumped, his movements mechanical. He was closing himself off from her, rebuilding the walls she had so enjoyed seeing crumble. The thought of losing this connection, this man, before it even truly began, was unbearable. The motorcycle was ready. Leo wheeled it out into the sunlight, its engine purring with a smooth, healthy hum. "She's all set," he said, his voice carefully neutral, avoiding her gaze. "The new injector works perfectly. You should have no more trouble." The finality in his tone was like a closing door. This was it. The end of the interlude. She was supposed to thank him, paid him, and ride away, back to her life of corporate takeovers and lonely luxury. The thought felt like a betrayal. A betrayal of him, of Mia, and of the person she had allowed herself to be for the past few days. The leather of her jacket felt like a costume again. The helmet in her hand, a mask she no longer wanted to wear. As she reached into her bag, ostensibly for cash to pay him, her hand brushed against the insistent vibration of her satellite phone, a device she kept for absolute emergencies. A glance at the screen showed a dozen missed calls from her chief of operations, along with a single urgent text. "Market panic. Hostile takeover imminent. Return to Zurich immediately." A cold dread washed over her. The real world, her world, was crashing in, with no regard for the fragile bubble she had built in this quiet town. Just as she was trying to process the message, the distinctive thwump, thwump, thwump of helicopter blades began to fill the air, growing rapidly louder, closer. Leo and Mia looked up, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe, as a sleek black helicopter descended from the sky, aiming for the open field behind the garage. The helicopter, emblazoned with the logo of Valerius Enterprises, landed with a gust of wind that kicked up dust and leaves, a dramatic, almost violent intrusion into the peaceful landscape. The side door slid open, and a man in a sharp, tailored suit jumped out, his face etched with anxiety. "Miss Valerius, thank God," he exclaimed, rushing towards her. "We've been trying to reach you for 36 hours. The board is in chaos. We need you now." The name hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Miss Valerius. Leo stared, his mind struggling to connect the dots. He knew that name. Valerius Enterprises was one of the biggest global conglomerates in the world. Their name was on everything, from pharmaceuticals to technology. And this man was calling Isabella, his Bella, Ms. Valerius. Isabella, or rather Isabella Valerius, turned to Leo, her face pale, her eyes pleading. "Leo, I can explain," she began, her voice desperate. But the words seemed hollow, lost in the roar of the helicopter and the magnitude of the revelation. Leo simply shook his head, a look of profound disbelief and hurt etched onto his features. He felt like a fool, a pawn in some game he didn't even know he was playing. The shared moments, the vulnerable confessions, the simple dinner, had it all been a lie? A billionaire's little vacation from reality? He felt a bitter cold anger rise in him, eclipsing the warmth that had filled him just days before. He looked at the helicopter, then at her expensive motorcycle, and finally at her, and he saw not the woman he was falling for, but a symbol of a world so far removed from his own, it might as well have been on another planet. Mia, clinging to her father's leg, looked terrified and confused. "Daddy, who is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Leo scooped her up into his arms, holding her tight as if to shield her from this sudden, overwhelming reality. He looked at Isabella, his gaze now cold and distant. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was a wall, higher and more impenetrable than any he had ever built before. He had opened his heart, shown her his deepest wounds, and in return, he had hidden her entire world from him. The sense of betrayal was sharp and deep, a clean cut right through the center of his burgeoning hope. The man in the suit was ushering her towards the helicopter. speaking in urgent, hushed tones about stock prices and board meetings. Isabella took a step toward the aircraft, then hesitated, looking back at Leo and Mia, a portrait of anguish. "Leo, please," she mouthed, her voice stolen by the wind and the noise. "Wait for me." But Leo just turned his back, carrying Mia towards the safety of the house, away from the whirlwind of wealth and deceit that had just torn through their lives. He couldn't bear to look at her, the woman, who was both a sweet, stranded traveler and a powerful, untouchable billionaire. He didn't know which one was real, or if either of them were. As the helicopter lifted off, creating another violent gust of wind, Isabella watched Leo's retreating form through the window, her heart shattering into a million pieces. He had what she thought she wanted. She had found someone who liked her for who she was, not what she had. But in her fear of the truth, she had created a lie so vast it had destroyed the very thing she cherished most. He was Isabella Valerius, the titan of industry, flying off to save her empire. But she was also just Bella, a woman leaving behind a kind mechanic and his wonderful daughter, her own heart now more broken than her motorcycle had ever been. The world of luxury awaited, but it had never felt so cold or so empty. The days that followed the helicopter's departure were silent and gray, even when the sun was shining. The garage, once a place of comforting routine for Leo, now felt like a mausoleum. Every corner held a memory of her. The stool where she sat listening to him talk, the spot on the floor where she'd knelt to tend to his foot, the faint, lingering scent of her perfume that he sometimes thought he caught on the breeze. He tried to lose himself in his work, but the clatter of his tools only echoed the emptiness in the workshop and in his chest. He had been played for a fool, a billionaire's little diversion. The thought soured every memory, turning moments of genuine connection into calculated deceptions in his mind. He felt a fool for his gullibility, for opening his heart so wide to a lie, no matter how beautiful it had been. Mia was quiet too, her usual bright chatter replaced by a somber watchfulness. She would ask about Bella in a small voice, her brow furrowed with a child's pure confusion. "Why did Bella leave in a helicopter, Daddy? Is she coming back to see my fort?" Each question was a small, sharp jab to Leo's already wounded heart. How could he explain a world of corporate jets and hostile takeovers to a 10-year-old? How could he explain that the kind woman who'd made daisy chains with her was also one of the wealthiest people on the planet? He couldn't, so he offered vague, unsatisfactory answers that left Mia feeling sad and him feeling like a failure. Not just for himself, but for his daughter who had also let the charming stranger into her heart. Meanwhile, a world away in a Zurich boardroom, Isabella Valerius was a force of nature. She moved with ruthless efficiency, her mind a razor-sharp instrument dissecting market trends and outmaneuvering corporate rivals. She successfully thwarted the takeover attempt, securing her empire with a display of strategic genius that left her board in awe. She was powerful, respected, feared. But every night in the sterile silence of her penthouse suite, overlooking the city lights, she would stare at her reflection and see only the ghost of the woman who had shared spaghetti in a small warm kitchen. The victory fell hollow, the accolades meaningless. She had saved her company, but she felt as though she had lost her soul. She tried to call him, dozens of times. Each call went straight to a voicemail that extremely never checked. She sent text messages, long rambling explanations poured from her heart, confessing her fear, her regret, her genuine feelings for him. She explained that Bella wasn't a lie, but the most real version of herself she had ever been allowed to be. She knew he wouldn't read them. He wrote letters on her finest stationery and sent them via courier, only to have them returned, unopened, marked return to sender. The wall of silence he had erected was more formidable than any corporate firewall she had ever encountered. He had cut her out completely, and the precision of the excision was excruciating. driven by a desperation that overshadowed her business acumen, Isabella did something impulsive. She had her assistant send a gift. Not a small token, but an extravagant one. A brand new, top-of-the-line tow truck for his garage. The best model money could buy. Delivered on a flathead with a giant red bow. It was a clumsy, misguided attempt to show her gratitude, to prove she could be a positive force in his life. The gesture backfired spectacularly. When the truck arrived, Leo looked at it with cold fury. It wasn't a gift. It was a transaction. It was charity. It was a billionaire's way of settling a debt, of reducing their shared experience to a monetary value. It was an insult of the highest order. He refused the delivery without a second thought. He told the stunned delivery driver to take the truck and its ridiculous bow and send it back to wherever he came from. The act of rejection was empowering, a small reclamation of his pride, but it did little to soothe the ache in his heart. That night, a local news channel, likely tipped off by a curious neighbor, ran a small segment. Local mechanic rejects mysterious $1 million gift. The story was picked up by national news outlets, hungry for a feel-good story about integrity. Suddenly, Leo's small private life was under a microscope. Reporters started calling, camping out at the end of his driveway. His sanctuary had been invaded. His privacy shattered, all because of her. The news story eventually reached Isabella, and she watched it on a tablet in her private jet, her heart sinking with every word. She saw the pain and anger in Leo's eyes, an expression she had put there. She had tried to fix things with money, the only tool she had ever truly mastered. And in doing so, she had only made things worse. She had not only broken his heart, but had also violated his world, exposing his quiet life to the harsh, unforgiving glare of the media. She had proven his worst fears about her correct, that their worlds were incompatible, that her presence in his life would inevitably bring chaos and pain. The chasm between them now seemed impossibly wide, a gaping canyon carved by wealth and misunderstanding. She finally understood. Apologies from afar, grand gestures of wealth, none of it would work. Words and money were her world's currency, but not his. His currency was honesty, integrity, and trust, all of which she had squandered. If she wanted any chance of rebuilding the bridge she had so carelessly burned, she couldn't do it from a boardroom in Zurich or a penthouse in New York. She couldn't send emissaries or gifts. She had to go back, not as Isabella Valerius, CEO and billionaire, but as Bella. She had to face him on his own turf, without the armor of her wealth, and navigate the labyrinth of her own making, hoping to find her way back to the man with the kind eyes and the grease-stained hands. But the question remained, would he even see her? Would he give her the chance to speak? She had lied, she had hurt him, and she had inadvertently turned his life upside down. She had proven to be a complication he had never asked for, a storm that had wrecked his peaceful shore. As she looked out the window of her jet, flying high above the clouds, she felt smaller and more powerless than ever before. She could command global markets, but she didn't know if he had the strength or the right words to win back the trust of one good, simple man. The journey back to him would be the hardest negotiation of her life. Isabella did not arrive in a helicopter or a chauffeured limousine. She arrived in a modest rental car, parking it down the street from the garage as if she were just any other customer. She wore simple jeans and the same borrowed t-shirt Leo had given her, which she had kept as a sacred relic of her time with him. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup, no jewelry. She was stripping away every trapping of Isabella Valerius, hoping that Leo might see just Bella standing before him. As she walked towards the garage, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. There was no safety net, no corporate strategy, just her threat, and a desperate, fragile hope for a second chance. Leo saw her coming. He was working on a customer sedan, his back to the driveway, but he felt her presence, a sudden shift in the air. He tensed, every muscle in his body going rigid. He had imagined this moment 100 times, playing out conversations where he was cold, angry, dismissive. He had practiced the words that would send her away for good, protecting his heart and his daughter from any more destruction. He slowly straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag, and turned to face her. The sight of her, looking so much like she did that first day, sent a wave of conflicting emotions through him. Anger warred with a longing so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He steeled himself, his expression an unweedable mass of stone. "Leo," she said, her voice soft, tentative. "I know I have no right to be here. I know I messed everything up, and I am so sorry. More sorry than I can ever say." She didn't make excuses. She didn't try to justify her lies. She simply stood there, vulnerable and exposed, and owned her mistakes. "I was a coward," she continued, tears welling in her eyes. "I was so afraid of you looking at me the way everyone else does, like a bank account, not a person, that I ended up hurting the one person who saw me for who I really was. The lie was to protect myself, but it ended up destroying the most real thing I've ever felt." Her confession hung in the air, raw and honest, stripping away the last of her defenses. He listened, his silence a heavy weight between them. He wanted to stay angry. It was safer. But her words, her genuine remorse, were chipping away at his resolve. Just then, the door to the house opened, and Mia ran out, stopping short when she saw Isabella. A huge, brilliant smile broke across her face. "Bella!" she cried, running forward and wrapping her arms around Isabella's legs. "You came back! I knew you would!" Isabella hugged the little girl tightly, burying her face in Mia's hair as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. Mia's unconditional welcome, whose simple, pure-hearted forgiveness was a powerful testament to the bond that had been formed. Leo watched them, his own walls beginning to crack under the force of his daughter's innocent love. "My world, it's complicated and often very ugly," Isabella said, her voice thick as she looked up from Mia's embrace to meet Leo's gaze. "I can't just walk away from it. There are thousands of people whose livelihoods depend on me. But I don't want that world without you in it. I don't want the penthouses or the private jets if I can't share them with you and Mia. I love you, Leo. I fell in love with the kind, decent man who fixed my bike and makes magic spaghetti, not his bank balance. I am asking you to believe that. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove it, to find a way to merge our worlds, no matter how difficult it is." It was a declaration, a plea, and a promise all in one. Leo looked from Isabella's tear-streaked, hopeful face to his daughter's beaming smile. He thought of the hollow silence of the past weeks, the ache of her absence that no amount of anger could numb. He had been so focused on the lie that he had forgotten the truth. The truth of how he felt when he was with her. The laughter, the connection, the feeling of his own broken parts beginning to mend. Was he willing to throw all of that away because of pride? Was he willing to let fear of her world rob him and Mia of this happiness? Her world was intimidating, yes, but the woman standing before him was not. She was just Bella, the woman he had fallen in love with. Slowly, he walked towards them, his heart making its final, momentous choice. He knelt down, putting him at eye level with both Isabella and his daughter. He reached out, his grease-stained hand gently wiping a tear from Isabella's cheek. "Your world is complicated," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And my world is simple. It's going to be messy, people will talk, it's not going to be easy." He paused, letting his words sink in, before a slow, gentle smile spread across his face. "But I've never been afraid of getting my hands dirty to fix something that's worth fading." He saw the flicker of hope in her eyes ignite into a brilliant flame. He then looked at Mia, who was watching them with wide, knowing eyes. "What do you think, kiddo? Should we let this messy, complicated princess stick around for a while?" Mia giggled and threw her arms around both their necks, pulling them into a tight three-person hug. "Yes," she shouted, "and she has to help with the pancakes." In that moment, Surrounded by the scent of gasoline and the warmth of his daughter's love, Leo closed the final distance and kissed Isabella. It wasn't the kiss of tentative sparks like the one they almost shared in the kitchen, but a deep, certain kiss of reunion, of forgiveness, and of a new beginning built not on a flawless foundation, but on the willingness to repair the cracks together. They'd had to make a choice, not between two worlds, but for one love that was strong enough to bridge them. Isabella didn't give up her company, and Leo didn't close his garage. Instead, they built a new life, a messy, beautiful hybrid. Sometimes she would fly home in her jet to find him and Mia waiting on the tarmac, and other times she would spend a week in her coveralls, handing him wrenches and learning the art of the engine tune-up. They found their balance between boardrooms and bake sales, between global summits and quiet evenings on the port sling. The world watched, fascinated, but they no longer cared. They had found their own private universe, a love story written in grease and gold, proving that the strongest hearts are not those that are never broken, but those that are brave enough to be mended. What happens when a simple act of kindness uncovers a world-shattering secret? Leo, a hard-working single father and mechanic, thinks he's just helping a stranded traveler named Bella. He offers his skill, his home, and his heart, drawn to her mysterious charm and the easy way she fits into his quiet life with his daughter Mia. But Bella is not who she seems. She is Isabella Valerius, a reclusive billionaire who has hidden her identity in a desperate search for a love that isn't attached to her fortune. Just as a fragile, genuine connection begins to form, a helicopter descends from the sky, shattering the illusion and revealing her true identity. Left in the dust of her departure, Leo is forced to confront a devastating betrayal. Was their connection real? Or was he just a quaint diversion for a woman who has everything? And for Isabella, can she navigate the labyrinth of her own lies to prove that her feelings are more valuable than her entire empire? Their story is a powerful collision of two vastly different worlds, asking if trust, once broken, can ever truly be repaired.